Starting us off at number 10, Making a Murderer. Okay, seriously, if you've never seen this documentary, I've talked about it in so many of these top 10 videos. I'm obsessed with it. Well, if you haven't watched it, it means you've been living under a rock, or two, you're Stephen Avery. All jokes aside, if you haven't binged the series yet, what the heck are you waiting for? You crazy?
We went through this 20 years ago, and we're going through it now again.
In this criminal justice system, good luck.
You are probably the most dangerous individual ever to set foot in this courtroom.
Making a Murderer examines the life of Stephen Avery, who spent a total of 18 years in prison for a crime that he didn't commit. But that's not the entire story. After he was released, he was given $400,000 for the wrongful conviction, but just days after he was a free man, he was accused of another murder and he was sentenced to spend life in prison. He was charged with the murder of Teresa Hellbach, kidnapping, sexual assault, and mutilation of a corpse. His 16-year-old nephew, Brendan Dassey, well, he was 16 years ago, he's much older now, he was also arrested for being associated with the murder, and he was convicted after he gave a false confession. He had no idea what he was saying, his IQ is very low, I feel so bad for him. Well, part 2 of the series have recently been released, and a high-profile lawyer is now on the case, and she has some pretty compelling evidence, so I know that you're gonna want to see what happens next. Into the Abyss climbs onto this list at number 9. Michael Perry and Jason Burkett, well, they went for a joyride one night in a red Camaro, and they ended up being charged with 3 murders back in 2001. But this documentary isn't about trying to get the state to reopen their cases. It's about looking into capital punishment and life on death row. Michael Perry was interviewed 8 days before he was scheduled to die, so we really get to see his vulnerability and weaknesses. We also see interviews of the survivors, witnesses, and police officers, which makes this documentary even more dark and pretty emotional.
So she let him in the house to use the telephone, and while he was doing that, Michael Perry stepped out of the laundry room, and that's when he shot her. This was the vehicle that Michael Perry and Jason Burkett was after. 3 people died for this car.
The confession tapes brings us to number 8.
They made me believe I killed someone I loved. They made me tell my mama I done it. And I didn't do it.
Innocent until proven guilty. Well, that's not always the case. This documentary will have you questioning our criminal justice system. The Confessions Tapes is a 7-episode series that focuses on innocent people confessing to crimes they didn't commit. And I know what you must be thinking. Well, how can someone actually confess to something if they didn't do it? Well, when you're being interrogated for hours and hours without a lawyer and given false promises, it's actually very common to confess. Strong alibis and lack of DNA evidence doesn't matter. Once the cops think you're guilty, they're trained in emotional deception in order to get you to confess to gruesome crimes that you've never even thought about committing. If you watch this series, trust me, you won't be disappointed.
Number 7, The Nightmare. If you're watching this in bed right now, I read some of these comments and a lot of you watch these videos when you can't sleep. I love it, that's awesome, I do the same thing on my phone. But this next one here on our list, you might want to turn on a nightlight or something. The Nightmare is a documentary directed by Rodney Asher, and it's all about sleep paralysis. Yeah, we love that. This documentary premiered at the 2015 Sundance Film Festival and killed it. If you don't know what sleep paralysis is, consider yourself lucky. Sleep paralysis is when a person finds themselves unable to move or speak while they're falling asleep or right when they're waking up. I've experienced it twice. It sucks. It is so scary. It's the worst thing. I was facing the wall and I couldn't move. It sounded like there was a goblin behind me going like, I was just like, it's worse. Yeah, if you live with somebody as well, sleep paralysis also sucks for them. This is where the magic happens. Yeah, cuts to 3 a.m. I'm screaming at the wall, literally frozen in fear. It sucks. So yeah, this documentary, you know, hit a weak spot for me, and maybe it'll hit you as well. Check it out. Number 6, The Perfect Bid. If you worked on the game show Price is Right back in 2008, you definitely don't want to see this documentary. Just one guy's like, oh, I can't watch it. So specific. The Perfect Bid. Okay, the contestant that knew too much. Superfan Ted Slauson was hooked on the game show Price is Right back in the early 70s. I mean, more than fair. Young Bob Barker, I quit. Game over. Good luck. Even when he was in Happy Gilmore, like he was an older guy, but like he was still young. He was like still doing stuff. He was hot old guy. This documentary shows just how dedicated Ted was. As soon as he turned 18, Ted constantly traveled to be a contestant on the show. Although he didn't get picked most of the time, Ted would yell answers to contestants and try and help them out. He would just be there, just in the background, being like, 17! And everyone's like, how did he know that? This guy's crazy. This guy studied the show. That's how he knew. He studied the prices, and then he made some stuff happen. Perfect Bid won the Best Documentary at Orlando Film Festival back in 2017. Director CJ Wallace honestly nails it. My grandmother would have loved this documentary. She was always yelling numbers at the TV. Maybe she was onto something as well. Who knows? I'll call her tonight and ask. With a Ouija board. A dark joke. Number 5, Blackfish. I bawled my eyes out watching this documentary, I'm not gonna lie, this was nuts. Blackfish was released back in 2013. It's directed by Gabriella Cabrathwaite, and it's about the beautiful killer whale named Tilikum. Tilly spent most of his life sadly in captivity at SeaWorld in Orlando, Florida. This documentary shows just how awful it is to be a killer whale. In fact, this documentary shows how awful aquariums and zoos are in general. The hard part is here, I remember seeing this exact killer whale when I was younger at this show. It was a magical day. And then as I got older, I started to ask some questions about zoos and captivity and stuff like that. This documentary, it just hits you hard, honestly. Tilly was captured in Iceland in 1983, and his life, as well as the lives of 3 SeaWorld trainers, were never the same afterwards. I knew about the incidents that occur in this documentary, like going into it, but seeing everything unfold, seeing old footage, this one honestly really hits. Number 4, Grizzly Man. Found footage documentaries are one thing, but found footage documentaries by Werner Herzog, well, you're in for something, my friend. Grizzly Man. Okay, where do I even begin? First of all, producer Chris here recommended this to me on my first week here. Believe it or not, I don't know if you remember that, but you actually recommended this. I was on Scary, I think, and you're like, you should watch this. Holy The documentary shows the grizzly bear activists Timothy Treadwell and Amy Hugengard, who were living amongst grizzly bears in Alaska. How wild is that? One year after another. It is insane. I'm not gonna spoil anything. Again, if you've somehow never heard about this or seen anything about it, that's why I'm here. Here we go. One of the craziest documentaries on the planet for sure. Timothy would record tons of footage during these summers, so even if you're not into documentaries per se, you'll still watch this and your jaw will drop. This is real life footage. Holy Number 3, Class Action Park. I grew up loving amusement parks. The tallest roller coasters in Canada are just a very short drive from me right now. That's always a fun weekend, right? But back in the day, amusement parks didn't have the same safety regulations that we have today. We have a seatbelt and a lap bar now. What? Why? Well, because of documentaries like Class Action Park, that's why. Directed by Seth Porges, this documentary explores the history of New Jersey's Action Park. Former employees and guests appear and share their take on the many incidents and injuries that took place. It's honestly really shocking. It made my heart race seeing how dangerous this park was back in the 80s and 90s. I can't believe it. Action Park was opened in 1978 and it was the first modern water park in the United States. One water slide had a loop. That's just the start, honestly. If this is really insane, watch this. Or don't. Watch it. Number 2, The Woman Who Wasn't There. This is past bizarre and just absolutely insane. This 2012 documentary, directed by Angelo J. Guglielmo, is about a woman named Tanya Head. Tanya claimed to have been on the 78th floor of the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. She claimed that her fiance had been in the other tower and had unfortunately passed away. Obviously dark subject matter. I'm not including this saying that this is bizarre in any way. What's bizarre is this documentary slowly unraveling the truth, that is Tanya never being in the tower that day in the first place. Yeah, in fact, she wasn't even in the country. In fact, Tanya is just one of her many aliases. Don't you want to know more? Doesn't it make your blood boil already? That's horrible. The Woman Who Wasn't There. Powerful piece. Go check it out. And finally, at number 1, Don't with Cats. Have you seen Don't with Cats? If you haven't, I'm not going to spoil anything. Somehow. Let me just start by saying this. It is heavy. It shows some real footage of horrible crimes and it's blurred at parts or cuts like last second, but it's still hard to watch. Don't F with Cats was released back in 2019, again on Netflix, directed by Mark Lewis, and it really shows how strangers can come together online in a positive way and hunt down a killer. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. If you somehow don't know anything about this story, it's important, especially if you're a fellow Canadian. This involves one of the most infamous crimes in Canadian history, and it couldn't have been told in a better way. Horrible events, of course, but the documentary and the storytelling here is compelling. It's gripping.
Starting off this countdown, we have Let There Be Light. The 1946 doc Let There Be Light was an educational film about the post-traumatic stress soldiers feel after returning home from war. On June 25th, 1945, Major John Houston was assigned by the Army Signal Corps to create a documentary on this. He visited a bunch of Army hospitals and saw the suffering these soldiers went through. This film was meant to inform the public how hard it is for veterans to fit back into society after what they have gone through. But in the end, the film was banned by the government for a couple of years. It was finally released in the 1980s, but then it was banned by the Army because apparently it was too controversial, and also because it was scaring new recruits. On top of that, they wanted their army to seem like great big warriors, and that when Americans got sent to war, they would come back stronger and a huge hero. This documentary went against that.
In our number 9 spot today, we have The Kingmaker. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. The documentary called The Kingmaker was directed by Lauren Greenfield, and it has been banned in the south of Thailand. This film is about the life of Imelda Marcos, who is the wife of the 10th president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos. The documentary apparently details not only her greed, corruption, and brutality, but also how she influenced her husband and his ruling. It also shows her desire to recuperate her family's public image to return them to what she would call glory. While it is unclear if this really is true, apparently authorities have said that the ban is taking place only because of the poster and title for the movie, not due to the content. A ban over a poster seems a little extreme, but hey, maybe that really is the case.
In our 8th spot, we have Seaspiracy. Shortly after this documentary was published, it went viral online, and a number of countries banned it. This documentary discusses the negative environmental impact of fishing, from pollution in the ocean to overfishing and ghost nets. It just shows you how problematic the big fishing industries are. It honestly makes you feel sorry for the marine life that we're killing, and kind of makes you not want to eat fish anymore. Like, it shows you that a number of whales and dolphins have been found dead with plastic in their systems. But countries banned it so their citizens don't know exactly what is happening out there to the oceans.
Now, in at number 7, we have The Keepers.
Bigger and deeper than we can imagine. The story is not the nuns killing. The story is the cover-up of the nun story.
We've all heard stories about priests using their authorities in order to take advantage of young children because they were protected by the church. And now this documentary sheds light on a cold case crime story that still needs to be solved. The story focuses on a 26-year-old nun who was a very popular teacher at a Catholic high school in Baltimore. She was murdered in 1969 and her body was found in the woods. And now, nearly 50 years later, people are starting to discover what really happened to Sister Kathy. This documentary shows us the horrifying truth about Catholic and government corruption that exists within churches, and we hear true stories about survivors telling us what really happened behind closed doors. I Am a Killer, well, I'm just saying a title of a Netflix TV show. Well, I Am a Killer is next up at number 6. This is a 10-episode documentary of scary interviews from convicted murderers. So if you've ever wanted to know what brings someone to murder, then this is a show for you. We've talked about wrongful convictions and unsolved murders, but this documentary is somewhat even more chilling. Each episode focuses on a man convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death row. None of them deny that they've committed brutal murders. Instead, this documentary shows us what really goes on in their minds.
If you ever thought about taking somebody's life, you better think about it long and hard. To walk that road right there is a lot of heartache. You may think you're tough, but really ain't nothing if you're a murderer.
Alright, number 5, Evil Genius. No, I'm not talking about myself. I'm a genius, just not the evil part. Okay, I'm a pretty big dum-dum. Well, this one's about one of the craziest bank robberies ever. Back in 2003 in Erie, Pennsylvania, a pizza delivery man walked into a PNC bank with a collar bomb around his neck, and he was carrying a gun that was disguised as a cane. And he handed the teller a note, and he grabbed a lollipop before strolling out of the bank. A few minutes later, the bomb exploded and he died. That's when things took a turn and got even more weird.
Told police that he was forced to rob the bank.
The FBI believe that whoever built the collar is patient and secretive. Brian Wells said he was supposed to go on a scavenger hunt.
He was supposed to go from point A to point B to point C, where the keys would be given him to release this bomb.
I watched this documentary, it's really good. Well, it was discovered that this pizza guy was being sent on an elaborate scavenger hunt in order to defuse the bomb around his neck. You're going to want to watch this true crime documentary because, trust me, things get really intense and it's just like, some things are like, how did that even happen? And in this documentary, there was a man who hid a dead body in his freezer for years and a mentally ill woman who had a lot of boyfriends who all died in mysterious circumstances. At the end of this documentary, you're wondering, like, is this woman the genius behind everything? The jinx takes us to number 4. Robert Durst was accused of murdering his wife, a close friend, and his former neighbor. Apparently the final episode of this series almost broke the internet. So I won't be giving away any spoilers, but here's what I have to say if you don't have any plans tonight. You should start watching this show.
Compelling evidence.
This case was not investigated the way it should have been.
A lot of smoke doesn't necessarily mean fire, but I think there's a lot of smoke here.
Not tell the whole truth. Nobody tells the whole truth.
This was such a groundbreaking series because before this documentary was released, Robert Durst refused to do any interviews with journalists. So this was actually the first time that he sat down for more than 20 hours over the course of several years in order to participate in this documentary. As it turns out, his cooperation might have been the biggest mistake of his life. And I'll just leave it as that. Mommy, Dad, and Dearest comes in to number 3. This insane documentary is about the lives of a mother and daughter, and their names is Dee Dee and Gypsy Rose Blanchard. The mother had an abusive mental illness called Munchausen. Basically, the mother convinced her daughter that she was severely ill, physically disabled, and unable to walk. This resulted in Gypsy undergoing several unnecessary invasive surgeries and taking a bunch of medications that she didn't even need. And this went on for nearly 20 years. It ended up when Gypsy killed her mother with the help of her boyfriend. Yeah, this documentary is very intense.
She had leukemia, and she was having seizures, and she had to be tube fed.
And then gradually that story fell apart.
Things are not always as they appear.
How do you kill your own mother?
And at number 2 is Paradise Lost trilogy. 3 teenagers were accused of murdering 3 young boys, and they were notoriously known as the West Memphis 3. They were convicted because they liked Metallica's music, they read Stephen King's novel, and the police were able to coerce one of the boys into falsely confessing. The teenager who confessed had a low IQ, and he was very vulnerable when he was being interrogated for 12 hours. So as a result of all of that and some sketchy evidence, one of them was sentenced to death and the other ones got life in prison. But the story doesn't end there. Celebrities and musicians, well, they believed that they were innocent, so they held several fundraisers in the behalf that they were wrongly convicted. And in July of 2007, there was shocking new evidence that was brought into the case. I won't spoil anything, but you guys need to watch.
Everybody in the town and in the courtroom and on the jury are all blinded by their fantasies about satanic cults.
The criminal confessions are too many manipulated by the police.
I'm going to be wondering if the true killers were actually captured.
And this staircase tops this list at number 1. If I were to say like a TV show that's better than Making a Murderer or better than any of these shows on here, it's this one. It is so good. In 2001, Kathleen Peterson was found dead at the bottom of her staircase. Her husband found her body and quickly called 911. He told the operator that she had an accident and that she was still breathing. Shortly after, Michael Peterson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. This documentary follows the trial, and it is full of twists, turns, and shocking moments.
Shift the foundations of my beliefs in the justice system.
The system is flawed and it needs to change.
This is contamination in the crime scene.
The DA is trying to say that our dad killed our mother.
There's no murder weapon, there's no motive.
But we're sitting behind our dad.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the royal family. The royal family has certainly had their fair share of drama this year so far, but that is not necessarily news to most people. Over the course of 18 months, from 1968 to 1969, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip allowed film crews to come in and follow their daily lives to create some sort of royal family documentary. Of course, the content of this documentary was heavily monitored by the royal family and those who deal with their public image, so the documentary itself didn't contain contain anything extremely dark or surprising. This documentary aired on BBC One in June of 1969, but ended up being banned by the Queen in 1972. The reason was apparently because they believed the film was in danger of killing off the monarchy, whatever that means. They explained that they felt like if they did things like this too often, that it would cheapen them by letting the magic seep out, and that people would just want to know more and more and more. I can see this point of view, but I also feel like there might be something a little more sinister going on here, especially considering everything that we do know. At the end of the day, this documentary is now actually on YouTube if you would like to and choose to go and view it.
In our ninth spot, we have The Men Who Killed Kennedy. And guys, here's your little friendly reminder to hit that thumbs up button because it really helps us out. This is a video documentary series that discusses the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It was created by British television network ITV. All 9 episodes of this documentary originally aired on the Discovery Channel. Now, any documentary dealing with death and assassinations are going to be dark. This wasn't a lighthearted docuseries, but not the entire series was banned, just the last 3 episodes that aired in 2003. Those 3 episodes were eventually pulled and are banned from ever airing again. This is due to the fact that they were way too controversial. In the final episode, it suggested that Lyndon D. Johnson, the US vice president at the time of the assassination, had something to do with his death. In the end, it was declared that the documentary was not credible and the documentary should have never aired. And they promised that they would not show those episodes again. So in this sense, it wasn't banned because it was too graphic, but because it was too controversial.
In our number 8 spot today, we have The Yes Men Fix the World. The Yes Men are a pair of activists who have a goal to raise awareness about different social and political issues. The way they go about this, however, has been highly controversial as they create films in which they impersonate people they dislike in an act that they call identity correction. In 2009, their second documentary titled The Yes Men Fix the World came out, which was the sequel to the 2003 film entitled The Yes Men. In this HBO documentary, the pair stir up controversy surrounding a few different issues, such as exposing the people who were profiting off of Hurricane Katrina, or the people who were behind the environmental disaster in Bhopal. It's not necessarily the things that they are fighting against that make people believe they're controversial, but more so the mission statement that the two share, which is that lies can expose the truth. The film, of course, has still managed to survive on past this lawsuit though, and despite being banned from release, there was a special edition of the movie that was released through good old BitTorrent. In our number 7 spot today, we have Sambal Belachan in San Francisco. In 1997, Madeline Lim made a 25-minute documentary called Sambal Belachan in San Francisco about 3 Singaporean lesbians, and while she dreamed of being able to screen it at festivals in her home country of Singapore, it unfortunately was banned from being viewed there. Her film was winning awards and accolades around the world, but the one place she really wanted to show it wouldn't let her. Madeline wanted to speak to the LGBTQIA+ community in Singapore through her film as it explored the lesbian experience of Singaporean women and the things they had to endure. In a small turn of events, 23 years after the release of the film, just last year the film was screened for a one-time screening to a limited audience in Singapore. The movie was shown with the highest rating for mature audiences, and while it's not a complete lift on the ban, it is a step in the right direction.
In our 6th spot, we have Under the Dome. Under the Dome is a 2015 documentary all about the air pollution and air quality in China. It exposes how toxic the air quality is for people living in China. It also talks about how the government needs to enforce regulations and needs to do more to combat this problem. On the first couple of days after the documentary was released online, it got more than 150 million views, which led to the government banning it and removing it from all Chinese video websites. Why? Well, it exposed a real problem that they don't want to deal with. In fact, this isn't the first time that China has downplayed their pollution problem. During a summit in 2014, it was revealed that their pollution was at 6 times the level deemed safe by the World Health Organization. But they removed that data from the US Embassy's reading.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Haxan. I actually don't know how to say that for sure. Haxan is a half documentary, half fantasy film that comes to us all the way from 1922 when it was first released. Directed by Benjamin Christensen, this documentary aimed to show what it was like during 15th century witch hunts, which sounds both terrifying and extremely interesting, and is what Benjamin calls one of the biggest catastrophes in the history of mankind. Apparently, this film actually is one that laid the foundation for horror movies to come and really pushed the film industry forward, which is quite a feat. This movie, however, ended up being banned in the United States and a few other countries as well because it was deemed too disturbing for public viewing. Benjamin never seemed bothered by the controversial reviews of the film, which truly is a testament to him making the film as he envisioned it needed to be made.
Coming in at number 4, we have India's Daughter. Just a quick warning, this documentary talks about some pretty heavy topics. This documentary discusses the Delhi gang case that happened on December 16th, 2012. On that day, a 23-year-old student was returning home after watching the film The Life of Pi with her friend. While on their way home, she was brutally attacked and was taken advantage of. It was so bad that she passed away days later in the hospital. So it was a pretty intense and heavy and serious documentary. In the end, it was banned in India. The government claimed that the documentary was trying to conspire against India on an international platform, which obviously it wasn't the documentary's intention at all. It also apparently violated a bunch of laws in India, like actually exposing who the victim of this horrific act was and showing images of her. Another reason it was banned because they didn't want it to cause public outrage or inspire criminals.
In the number 3 spot today, we have Jack Johnson versus James Jeffries. This isn't exactly what you think of when we say the word documentary, but I absolutely needed to include it on this list today. On December 26, 1908, Jack Johnson defeated the defending heavyweight champion, Tommy Burns, and became the first black heavyweight champion of the world, which is incredible and should absolutely be celebrated, right? Unfortunately, this was 1908, so it was seen as a threat, and immediately they began trying to find another white person he could fight in order to beat Jack and win the title, and this person was James Jeffries. The fight took place on July 4th, 1910, and this is back in a time when prize fighting was on the rise, and since this fight was so huge, it was of course video recorded. Usually black men wouldn't have even been able to compete for a world title, so it was of course controversial news when he not only competed but won twice. Immediately after the second win, angry racist mob violence began throughout the country, which led to the video of the fight being banned. But this led to some of them being hurt or even killed by these racist people. The fight became notorious all around the world and was one of the most talked about fights for years to come.
In our second spot, we have Plandemic. Released in 2020, this documentary is just one big conspiracy theory video that spreads misinformation about COVID-19. The film features Judy Mikovits, a discredited former researcher who is also an anti-vaxxer. In the documentary, she spreads a bunch of lies, like how she tried to speak up about the truth of COVID-19 and how she was silenced and jailed as a result. In reality, she was just fired from her research job and was arrested after she took a bunch of lab materials and her computer, and then she fled. In the video, she makes several claims like wearing a mask and washing your hands increases the risk of getting the virus, and that the virus is just one big government plan, that the vaccines will be used to then control everyone. She also claims that the cells used in the vaccine can cause cancer, which is also false. As a result of the misinformation spread in the documentary, it has been banned. Any video on the documentary will also be removed, and same with any tweet about it. So let's hope that this video doesn't get removed.
In our number 1 spot today, we have Jenin Jenin. Earlier this year, an Israeli court blocked a documentary about the 2002 massacre between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians in the city of Jenin at a refugee camp. The documentary, which is called Jenin Jenin, was first brought to the court by a soldier who is in the film. He filed a lawsuit because in the film he is accused of stealing from an elderly Palestinian man, which he claims is untrue. The court not only ordered in favor of the soldier and ruled that the director of the documentary pay both him and the court expenses, but the court also said that they found some other events in the documentary to be untrue. The encounter in 2002 was very deadly and destructive and caused a lot of harm, and there was even a Human Rights Watch investigation. When the documentary was first released, it was banned in Israel, but a Supreme Court later overturned that ban. The documentary is told entirely by survivors of the situation, which is obviously very important. The documentary is now banned again in Israel, but there is no ban on the film on YouTube.
We're to start off the list with the act of killing. I remember a lot of people talking about this one when it came out. It definitely made some waves. This 2012 doc was directed by Joshua Oppenheimer, exploring the Indonesian mass deaths 1965 to 66. The film takes a very unique approach. Oppenheimer and his crew had some of the perps of these atrocities actually reenact their crimes right on camera, making for a very chilling and even kind of surreal viewing experience. The film was certainly different and was exploring very heavy subjects, and it received critical acclaim. But along with that, of course, came controversy and bans. The documentary was first released in 2012 and quickly gained international attention, but the Indonesian government weren't too happy about it. The film ended up getting banned in Indonesia because of concerns about its potential to incite violence and disrupt social order. The ban sparked a lot of debate. A lot of people thought the ban was just immoral, showing a reluctance on the government's part to confront very uncomfortable historical truths. But aside from the ban in its home country, the film continued to receive global recognition and even won a bunch of awards. Next, we have the most recent doc on the list, released in 2020, The Dissident. This one was directed by Brian Fogel and explores the brutal death of Saudi Arabian journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul in 2018. Khashoggi was known for his critical stance against the Saudi government and had sought asylum in the US. The movie delves into Khashoggi's life, work, the events leading up to his death. It heavily implicates the Saudi government in Khashoggi's death, so it probably comes as no surprise that they were completely opposed to the documentary, viewing it as an attack on the country's reputation. Streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon just refused to buy it, likely in fear of offending the Saudi government even further.
In our seventh spot, we have Capturing the Freedmans. This HBO documentary filmed by Andrew Jarecki was released in 2003. Initially, it was meant to be a short film about children's birthday party entertainers in New York. It was titled Just a Clown. But while filming, he made a shocking discovery that completely made him shift gears. So while filming a man named David Friedman, who was a very popular clown, he learned that David's brother Jesse and his father Arnold were guilty of some very bad things to young individuals. It started back in 1987 when the US Postal Service intercepted a magazine of explicit images of young people. It was making its way over to the Friedman's house. That's when police investigated Jesse and Arnold. The two were then given a stay-at-home order while preparing for court, and they decided to document what was going on. So they had a number of tapes that captured family dinners, private conversations, and arguments, etc. The documentary shows these home videos and follows the two Friedman men. Due to the film's content though, this documentary was banned in a couple of countries.
In our number 6 spot today, we have Earthlings. Earthlings was a film made in 2005 and was a documentary that focused on the way that humanity uses animals. It was definitely meant to shed a negative light on the day-to-day practices of some of the largest industries in the world that all heavily rely on animals. The footage for the film was largely captured using hidden cameras. This documentary first became controversial not because of the conversation it sparks, but because of how gruesome some of the footage was, particularly the footage from puppy mills. I honestly wouldn't even recommend viewing this footage and would much prefer a different way of educating on the horrors of these things because it really is just terrible. People were also upset because they thought that the film's director was just trying to push a vegan lifestyle on others by using scare tactics, but I'm not quite sure that this was the goal of the film at all. The film saw more controversy just last year when a Ukrainian man named named Maxim Kryvosh held a bus with 13 passengers hostage and demanded, along with other things, that the president of Ukraine make a statement saying that watching the film Earthlings was recommended viewing for everyone. The president did end up releasing this statement, and thankfully all of the hostages were released without any incident, and the president's recommendation was then deleted. After this, Earthlings director did also make a statement regarding the situation, explaining that it does not endorse or condone acts of terror, and that its message is one of compassion for all beings.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with The Act of Killing. This is a 2012 documentary about the group of people who committed a bunch of murders in 1965 to 1966 as part of the Indonesian genocide. However, the film mainly centers around one of the murderers, Anwar Congo. It is said that he took the lives of 1,000 people. What made this documentary so controversial and disturbing is the fact that the film had Anwar Congo recreate some of his murders. People said in a way it was romanticizing death and violence. I mean, this dude talked in detail about the murders, like saying his preferred method of killing was to use a wire and then strangle his victims. To him, this was a neater way to kill. In the end, the Indonesian government did not like this film, saying it showcased a misleading portrayal of Indonesia.
In our number 4 spot today, we have The Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco is a hugely popular tourist destination, but it is also one of the most popular spots in the whole world where people will go to take their own lives. When the filmmaker Eric Steele heard about this extremely sad statistic, he decided he wanted to make The Bridge, in which he would attempt to figure out why this was the most popular spot, but also he wanted to show people attempting or even succeeding with this action so that he could show that basically nothing is being done to try and prevent this from happening. This documentary quickly became very controversial because there were many people who believed that the film was glorifying this action, despite that most definitely not being the film's intention. People felt as though the film turned this into entertainment and normalized the action. There was also some drama between Eric and the members of the Golden Gate National Recreation Area Agency, who said that Eric didn't disclose his true intentions when he applied for a filming permit, but in the grand scheme of what this film is about, I think that this is the last thing that anyone should be worried about.
Moving on, at number 3 we have Zoo. Okay, where do I begin with this one? So basically, this whole documentary surrounds the death of Kenneth Pinyan, a man that passed away in 2005 after engaging in sexual activities with a horse. But that's not the disturbing part. The worst part is apparently the documentary tries to justify this man's actions, and it defends him, saying basically love is love, whether that's a love for another human or for an animal. An actual review said, and I quote, "The documentary spent too much effort trying to defend these actions rather than documenting what actually happened. I thought the point of documentary filmmaking was to be objective and neutral on the subject and to present the evidence and let the audience make up their own minds." So do I even have to explain why this documentary was banned in certain places? I mean, hello, it's a fairly controversial and disgusting topic.
In our number 2 spot today, we have Titicut Follies. Different films get banned for a multitude of reasons, which usually comes down to the topics being controversial or up for debate, but this specific documentary was banned because of the fact that it was just absolutely horrifying to every audience. This extremely important but upsetting documentary was made in 1964 and explored the life inside the Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane. As you can imagine, life for the people living inside of this hospital was terrible, and this documentary did not hold back on shining the light. It showed the neglect that the inmates faced from their caretakers, as well as even more horrible things that they had to endure. This film was originally banned because some people believed they needed to protect the identity of the people portrayed in the film, which I understand, but that does seem kind of backwards and like it would only be benefiting the people who desperately needed to be exposed. In 1991, however, the ban on this film was lifted and people were able to see the reality that many people at this hospital faced every day.
And And in our number one spot, we have Faces of Death. This film is banned in 40+ countries. That's just how gruesome it actually is. In 1978, this documentary was released and people were horrified at how graphic it was. The film contained real footage of dead or dying humans and animals. In one scene, you see a body being sliced open in an autopsy. Another scene shows a man being electrocuted. And in another, you see a monkey get beat to death by a hammer. Yeah, they showed all that and more in this film. It's basically like they collected the most disturbing real-life footages from all over the world and compiled them together for this film. As a result of its very graphic content, the movie was banned in 40+ countries.
We're going to start things off with the Sweatbox. So during the production of The Emperor's New Groove, Disney, like they used to do with many of their animated projects, wanted to do a making-of documentary. This 2002 film was directed by Trudy Styler, a documentarian and wife of Sting, who had originally been hired to make music for the movie. Now, the film didn't turn out exactly how Disney envisioned it. As everyone knows, Disney likes to be portrayed in a very particular way. They sugarcoat things, and when the higher-ups saw the finished product, they weren't too happy about it. The film was very transparent, showing exactly what it was like working for Disney at that time, really highlighting how the creatives and the executives butted heads. And basically, there was a lot more drama involved than the happy, magical workplace environment Disney wanted to portray. So the film was never released, at least not officially. In 2012, it was leaked online by an 18-year-old cartoonist. Not sure how he got his hands on it, but it's floating around on the internet. The quality is pretty trash though. It's safe to say we'll probably never see a proper version of this thing showing up on Disney+. You know what will show up though, officially every single day? A new video from us. So hit that subscribe button, alright? You don't want to miss out on anything. Next up is the 1970 documentary Let It Be. This is a pretty infamous film that was said to be the last nail in the coffin that led to the Beatles finally splitting up. The film is notoriously hard to find. It only had a very limited home video release in 1981, and even in this version, there was about an hour of footage removed from the original cut. So you can find rips of it online, but not in great quality, and you'll still not be seeing the full version. So why hasn't this doc ever gotten a proper home release or nowadays available for streaming? Well, the band wasn't happy about it. Apparently, when they sat down to watch the original cut in 1969, they complained that there was too much John and Yoko stuff, too much dirty laundry that they didn't want being aired out to the public. And John Lennon in particular talked about how the film seemed to be edited and shot in a way that made Paul McCartney seem like the most important member of the band, with everyone else, quote, just lying around. So a full hour of the runtime was chopped out before the doc was released for its limited theatrical showing. Forget not being allowed to watch it, the original cut of this movie may not even exist anymore. Next, we have India's Daughter. This film was directed by Leslie Udwin, focused on the violent death of Jyoti Singh in Delhi. The film focuses on the aftermath of the event, mainly the public outcry for justice in contrast to the justice system's response. Features interviews with the victim's parents, one of the convicted perpetrators and his defense lawyers are also interviewed. The film also includes discussions with various others, like activists, experts, officials, talking more about the broader issue of gender-based violence in India. When the movie came out, it didn't go so smoothly. It was met with a lot of controversy and legal challenges. The government took issue with the film, believing that it could potentially incite public unrest and hurt the country's image. So the Indian government banned it, preventing its broadcast and distribution within the country. Some felt that the film could help start conversations about gender-based violence, while on the other hand, critics argued that it was just sensationalizing and exploiting a very tragic event. The Man Who Mends Woman. This is a documentary film directed by Terry Michelle, released in 2015. It's about Dr. Dennis Mukwege, a Congolese gynecologist and human rights activist known for his work in treating victims of SA in the Dominican Republic of the Congo. The film shed a lot of light on the widespread use of this horrendous crime as a weapon of war in the DRC and the challenges faced by Dr. Mukwege in his mission to heal and empower women. It delves into the politics of the region, looking at issues like armed conflict, gender-based violence, and the plight of the victims. But the film ended up being banned in its home country. The government did not appreciate its portrayal of the country's army in a negative light. Dr. Mukwege went on to do pretty well for himself, though, even winning a Nobel Peace Prize in 2018. Next up is The Cove. So this documentary centers around the annual dolphin hunt in Taiji, Japan. The film was criticized by the Japanese government, leading to restrictions and limited screenings in the country. Very limited. The film follows a team of activists, including Rico Berry, a former dolphin trainer turned advocate, who are attempting to bring attention to the brutal practices taking place in Taiji. It showcases the mass slaughter of dolphins and the capturing of some for use in the entertainment industry. It also discusses the environmental impact and potential health risks of consuming dolphin meat. The Japanese government and even many locals were not too pleased with the film. It portrayed a traditional practice in a very negative light. Now, to be fair, it was never officially banned in Japan outright, but it became a pretty difficult movie to see. Some theaters were reluctant to show it. Most of them just did not show it at all. It only ended up playing in a few theaters, and they were surrounded by protesters, and there were concerns about potential legal actions against the team involved in its distribution. Alright, this next one is pretty infamous. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this before. Faces of Death. This is just one movie in a whole long list of films banned in the UK in the early 80s, primarily low-budget graphic horror movies which became known as video nasties. At one point, video rental stores were literally raided by police, confiscating tapes on the video nasties list. Evil Dead was on there. Really? Faces of Death was one of the most notorious on the list, and I'm focusing on this one today because it was really marketed as a documentary. Turns out it technically wasn't really. There was some genuine archival footage used in the movie, but most of the stuff in it was just staged, but convincingly staged. So, what's the movie about? Well, it supposedly consists of various real footage of people dying in various ways. Pretty much it. It went on to spawn a whole whack load of sequels and imitations, most famously Traces of Death, which I discussed in part 1. If you haven't checked that out yet, please do. Next up, we have The Panama Deception, released in 1992. This one criticized the United States invasion of Panama. It was briefly banned in the United States. The film was directed by Barbara Trent, critically examining the United States military intervention in Panama in 1989. It gives a very detailed analysis of the events leading up to the invasion, the reasons behind it, the consequences of the people in Panama. The film uses a combination of archival footage, interviews, and investigative journalism to give an alternate perspective on the US military action. And this was in direct opposition to the official narrative being given by the government at the time. The doc made the case that the invasion, codenamed Operation Just Cause, was not solely about protecting American citizens or restoring democracy, but also about securing US interests, particularly control of the Panama Canal. The film was banned in Panama, and the public broadcasting service banned it from being broadcast in the US. Despite all that, though, it still received the Academy Award for Best Documentary Feature in 1992. Next up, we have the 1971 documentary Sikkim. This film was commissioned by the King of Sikkim and directed by renowned Indian filmmaker Satyajit Ray, one of the most well-respected and influential filmmakers of all time. The purpose of the doc was to celebrate the sovereignty of Sikkim, a Himalayan kingdom between India and Tibet. But things took a very unfortunate turn. Ray was approached by the King of Sikkim to create a documentary that would showcase the unique cultural and historical aspects of the area, a celebration of its freedom, and then Sikkim became part of India as a state. So the film ended up getting banned, not just by the Indian government, but by the very people who commissioned it in the first place, the authorities of Sikkim. So the doc was kept hidden away, untouched and unseen. It wasn't until 2010, almost 4 decades after it was made, that it saw the light of day. It was screened at the 16th Kolkata Film Festival, but it wasn't around for long. After that initial screening, it was promptly pulled from public viewing once again. Here's one that'll probably ring a bell. Citizen 4, directed by Laura Poitras. This documentary is about Edward Snowden. The film was, unsurprisingly, pretty controversial and faced heavy restrictions in some countries. The film gives an inside look at the revelations made by Edward Snowden, former NSA contractor, regarding mass surveillance programs carried out by the US government. We follow Poitras and journalist Glenn Greenwald as they meet with Snowden in Hong Kong, showing the tense moments leading up to the whistleblowing. The film received a lot of acclaim for its real-time portrayal of a pretty significant moment in modern history, and that ended up winning the Academy Award for Best Doc feature in 2015. As you could probably imagine though, the US government, particularly intelligence agencies, saw Snowden's actions as treason, and they were concerned that the film could be perceived as glorifying or sympathizing with them. Those same critics also said the doc was too one-sided, not delving into any potential national security implications. Alright, we're rounding off the list with the Venezuelan documentary Cavismo, the Plague of the 21st Century. This one was released in 2018. It is about the social, political, and economic factors that led to the rise of Hugo Chavez as the president of Venezuela. It explores his abuse of power and society's reaction to it, with heavy focus on the student movement. The documentary also delves into the secrecy surrounding an illness Chavez had. The film gained a good amount of recognition at the time, having a pretty successful festival run, but it was banned in its home country of Venezuela in 2019. The Supreme Tribunal of Justice of Venezuela ordered the ban of the documentary screening at USB and other public universities. The ban was enacted in response to a prosecutor's request who investigated the doc as a potential hate crime or for inciting hate crimes. The decision to ban the doc triggered a response from the USB Teachers Association, which criticized the move as an infringement on freedom of speech in Venezuela. But the director, Gustavo Tovar Arroyo, saw things another way. He actually kind of made the best of the whole thing, calling the situation a, quote, success without precedent. Because, you know what, sometimes bad press and controversy is kind of the best marketing a movie can get, and this ban did generate a lot of interest in the documentary, especially amongst students.
Starting off our list at number 10, The Tinder Swindler. Okay, Peter's down, I don't have time, my enemies are coming, I need like $20,000 stat. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. It's pretty recent too, it's on Netflix, and I'll try not to spoil anything. But the memes are already out of control, so honestly, good luck. You probably already know what I'm talking about at this point. The Tinder Swindler is a guy named Simon Lviv. He would go on Tinder, he would date women, and then scam them. It sounds pretty bad on paper, but hearing the story told from the victims, the way it all plays out in this documentary, a movie by the way, not a series, which is bonus. It's absolutely insane. This guy was apparently hanging out with French Montana at one point as well. French Montana watched this documentary this week and then posted on his Instagram story like 2 days ago about it. The Tinder Swindler is directed by Felicity Morris. You know who doesn't want you to see this documentary? Probably Simon Lviv. And his enemies. His enemies probably don't want any of us to watch this. They're coming for us. Number 9, Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond. I was born in 1994, okay? I grew up with Jim Carrey. I love Jim Carrey. I'll start by saying that. If you also love Jim Carrey, don't watch this documentary. Just skip it. This is a ride, okay? Jim and Andy, The Great Beyond was released on Netflix back in 2017. It's directed by Chris Smith. Smith also produced Tiger King and the Fire Festival documentary. So yeah, buckle up, it's pretty wild. Man on the Moon was released back in 1999. It starred Jim Carrey as Andy Kaufman, Danny DeVito as George Shapiro, and the movie was a hit. Jim Carrey was nominated for Outstanding Performance by a Male Actor in a Leading Role at the Screen Actors Guild Awards in 2000. This documentary shows what kind of nightmare it was working on that film. Jim Carrey got so into character that it was shutting production down for days at a time. Look, I respect actors that go all out. Method acting is wild. I can't even imagine the process that goes into that. But like, let other people do their job too. Don't harass the barista who woke up 17 hours ago because you're exploring your character. Number 8, Tickled. This 2016 documentary is about exactly what you think I'm gonna say. Tickling. I'll start by saying I grew up the youngest out of 3. I've been around the block when it comes to being tickled, okay? They would hold me down. My neck is a target. This spot here and here, just get out of here. I have a long neck too, so they were coming for me. Any time of the day, my neck was always under attack. New Zealand journalist David Ferrier makes his directorial debut with this documentary. And a lot of people can't tell if it's a mockumentary or not. It's one of those where you're like, is this real or are people just pretending? What's going on? It's about competitive tickling. Need I say more? Chris, are you ticklish? A little bit. A little bit where? Armpits and back. Okay, cool. Then you shouldn't watch this. Chris, you should not watch this. And if you're ticklish, you should definitely not watch this documentary. Stay safe out there. Watch those sides, necks, and back, apparently. Nice. Little do we know.
Traces of Death. So, this 1993 documentary is banned in the UK. Won't be the last one banned in the UK on this list, by the way. Spoiler alert. So, I'm sure you've all heard of Faces of Death, one of the most controversial movies of all time, probably. When it came out in 1978, people actually thought it depicted real footage of people dying. Turns out most of that movie was actually recreated stuff, just done with a very convincing found footage kind of style. Traces of Death, though, is actually what Faces of Death marketed itself to be. All the footage used is of real car accidents, real dead bodies. You can imagine what it consists of. It's a real family movie night kind of flick. But yeah, the UK has a lot stricter rules when it comes to violent images, so this thing was banned entirely. But what does banned really mean anymore when we have the internet, right? Yeah, it's still pretty readily available on the web. I skimmed through some of it in preparation for this video, and yeah, not for me. I'm a big horror movie fan, but I like my horror firmly rooted in fiction. Thank you very much. Next, we have another documentary banned in the UK. This one actually having come out of the UK. Bare Fist, the sport that wouldn't die. This documentary was about a bare-knuckle boxer named Lenny McLean. We follow his son, Jamie, seeing the story play out from his perspective. But the British Board of Film Classification refused to certify the movie on 2 separate occasions. They didn't want to glamorize bare-knuckle boxing, and they also thought the film could lead to viewers getting potentially lethal advice. Apparently there's a scene in the film where they talk about lacing their wraps with shards of broken glass. There's another movie that shows fighters covering their wraps with broken glass. Kickboxer. Yeah, remember the last fight in that movie? You know, they dip it in the glass. Van Damme. Is that movie banned in the UK? I doubt it. Next up is the 1969 documentary The Royal Family. This was a made-for-TV documentary that aired on BBC about Queen Elizabeth II and her family. There was over 40 hours of footage shot covering an entire year of her life, which was cut down to 110 minutes. I would have hated to be the editor on that project, especially back then without the kind of editing software we have now, and with how unexciting most of this footage had to have been. I read what's included in this movie, and you know, it's them eating breakfast, they watch TV, they have a barbecue. I'm not kidding, like, this is what goes on in this movie. The only entertaining part is there's a scene apparently where Charles is practicing the cello and a string snaps and hits his younger brother Edward in the face. Honestly, if those are the best bits they could find though, it must have been a real slog putting this thing together. I bet there must have been far more juicy stuff that they just weren't allowed to use in the cut though, right? But why aren't you allowed to see this documentary today? Well, apparently some felt that the documentary revealed a little too much about the royal family. David Attenborough was quoted at the time saying that the film was in danger of, quote, killing the monarchy. The whole institution depends on Mystique and the tribal chief in his hut. If any member of the tribe ever sees inside the hut, then the whole system of the tribal chiefdom is damaged and the tribe eventually disintegrates. The doc has never had a home release, but it was just recently leaked on YouTube, and I think it's still up there, so check it out if this sounds entertaining to you. Next on the list is the 1967 documentary Titicut Follies. This film was directed by Frederick Wiseman. It was a no-frills, up-close and personal look at the patients of Bridgewater State Hospital for the criminally insane in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. The camera crew didn't intervene in the goings-on. They just set up and shot what was going on and what they were observing, and what was documented was not pretty. Patients were mistreated and neglected, barely ever being bathed. The staff were shown to be rude, even bullying the patients at times. The crew spent 29 days filming at the location, and Wiseman edited the footage down to an 84-minute piece. And just days before the film was set to release at the New York Film Festival, the Massachusetts government stepped in. They wanted the film banned. Now, their argument was that the film violated the patient's privacy, but Wiseman had gotten their permission, and the government also claimed, though, that he hadn't upheld his contract to allow the state to have control over the editing of the film. Wiseman had edited the film in secret, but this contract that he'd made there was not ever in writing. It was just a verbal contract, so it was kind of hazy there. Regardless, though, the film was only allowed to be shown to medical professionals or students. And of course, what was really going on, though, of course, was that a government-funded institution was being shown in a very negative light, and they did not want that. So they tried to put their foot down and just stop it from being seen. There's a lot more to this story, though. Honestly, we could probably do an entire video about this movie alone, but it is finally available, being selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. All right, another UK banned documentary, Brave, Bashed, Battered, and Bruised. This is another fight-focused one, if you can't tell from the title. To put it bluntly, this is a martial arts doc with tons of footage of people just getting like knocked out and injured during crazy martial arts brawls. Pretty simple. And because of the nature of the doc, the British Board of Film Classification rejected the movie, saying it was, quote, selling the pleasures of gross violence through its unrelenting focus on the infliction of injury and pain. Yeah, this is before the UFC really took off. Doubt this movie would have had any issue getting released today. Next up, we have a documentary that was banned in Israel. The film was directed by Palestinian actor Mohammed Bakri, features interviews with residents of the Jenin refugee camp after the events of Operation Defensive Shield in 2002, when Israeli defense forces invaded a Palestinian refugee camp about a month after 18 Israelis lost their lives in 2 separate attacks. But the Israeli government barred any journalists from entering the camp, so as for what went on during the operation, it was just word of mouth, and according to survivors, it had been an all-out massacre. Bakri snuck into Jenin with a camera in order to interview residents about what really went on, and according to them, many of the rumors that had been circulating turned out to be true. Most disturbingly, people's homes were demolished while they were still inside. In the end, 500 or possibly even more people at the camp lost their lives. The Israeli Film Council attempted to ban the film and initially didn't succeed, but just recently in 2021, the film ban was restored. Death of a Legend. This is a Canadian doc that was banned in the US, Florida in particular. What could the Canadians have done to get their film banned in Florida? I'm gonna tell you. This 1971 documentary made for the National Film Board of Canada is about wolves. It sheds a positive light on an animal that is often depicted as dangerous and evil. It teaches viewers about their life cycle and even shows footage of them being born. Well, parents started complaining when the film was shown in schools because there was a couple scenes of wolves hooking up. Finally, though, we have the Save the Children Fund film. This 1969 film was commissioned by the Save the Children Fund, a British-based charity. They hired director Ken Loach to undertake the project, but they did not like the finished product. The film ended up exposing some of the less than savory attitude the charity had towards some of the other cultures they were apparently there to help, and Ken Loach was just not a fan, so he set out to expose this kind of stuff. For example, he visited one of their institutions in Nairobi where kids weren't allowed to speak in their native language. There were some colonial aspects to the charity that came to light in the doc, and so when the higher-ups saw the film, they set out to have it banned, and they succeeded. The film was kept hidden away for years. It wasn't until 2011 when it was finally shown for a single screening, and since then there have been a handful of screenings here and there, but never a wide release.